Ben's seemingly perfect life takes a shocking turn when he discovers his wife's affair, shattering their trust and exposing a web of lies. As he struggles to confront the betrayal, he uncovers a deeper, sinister plot involving her manipulative lover. With danger escalating and their lives hanging in the balance, Ben and Sarah must navigate a treacherous path of deceit, revenge, and redemption. Will they overcome the challenges and reclaim their lives, or will the darkness of their choices consume them? This gripping story of heartbreak and resilience will keep you on edge until the very last moment. Trust. It's the foundation of every relationship. But what happens when that trust is shattered? Today's story takes us to the quiet town of Maplewood in 2018, where beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect marriage lay secrets that would change everything. Buckle up as we unravel a tale of love, betrayal, and the cost of truth. The house on Willow Lane was the kind most people would envy. A white picket fence, vibrant flower beds, and the faint sound of wind chimes in the distance. Inside lived Ben and Sarah Porter, a couple whose life seemed like a page out of a romantic novel. Ben was the quintessential small-town husband, a high school teacher who loved his job and adored his wife. Sarah was the creative spirit, running a local bakery that had become a community favorite. They had met in college, a classic love-at-first-sight moment during a library study session. Ben was the calm, thoughtful type, while Sarah was vibrant and full of life opposites. Some would say, but they balanced each other perfectly. Together, they built a life that seemed as solid as the oak tree standing tall in their front yard. Every morning, Ben would prepare coffee for Sarah before she headed to the bakery. It was his small ritual to show he cared, a way to remind her that she was loved. Sarah, in turn, made sure to pack his lunch with handwritten notes tucked inside. To their friends and family, they were the ideal couple, a symbol of what love and partnership could look like. But even the strongest oak can hide rot beneath its bark. Sarah's bakery had been thriving for the past few years, thanks to her innovative recipes and magnetic personality. She worked long hours, pouring her heart into the business, which often meant Ben found himself eating dinner alone. He never complained, though he understood how much the bakery meant to her. Lately, though, things felt different. Sarah seemed more distracted, her laughter a little less genuine. Ben noticed the small changes, a new perfume he hadn't seen before, longer hours at work, and the way she kept her phone face down on the counter. When he asked her about it, she brushed it off with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's just the holiday rush," she said one night, setting her phone aside as they sat in the living room. "You know how busy this time of year gets?" Ben nodded, though the gnawing feeling in his gut didn't go away. One evening, after grading papers at his desk, Ben glanced at the calendar. Their 10th anniversary was just a week away, a decade of love, memories, and milestones. He decided to surprise Sarah with a romantic getaway to the lakeside cabin where they had spent their honeymoon. It was the perfect plan to rekindle the spark that seemed to be fading. The next morning, Ben mentioned the idea over breakfast. "A weekend at the lake?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with hesitation. "That sounds wonderful. But with the bakery—" "I already checked," Ben interrupted, smiling. "I called your assistant, Emily. She said she could handle everything while we're away." Sarah's expression softened, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Unease, perhaps. "That's sweet of you, Ben. Let me check my schedule, and I'll get back to you." For the first time in their marriage, Ben felt like he was competing for Sarah's attention. Later that week, as Ben drove home from school, he decided to stop by the bakery to surprise Sarah. It was a rare lull between his afternoon classes, and he figured she'd appreciate the gesture. When he arrived, he noticed her car parked out front. But as he approached the door, he hesitated. Through the window, he saw Sarah standing close to a man he didn't recognize. They were laughing. The man, a tall, confident figure with sharp features, leaned in slightly as he spoke, and Sarah's hand brushed against his arm. Ben felt his chest tighten. He told himself it was nothing, just a friendly conversation. But the way she smiled at the man was different, softer, as if she had let her guard down completely. Ben walked in, the bell above the door chiming loudly. Sarah turned abruptly, her face flushing. "Ben, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice too cheerful. "I had some free time and thought I'd drop by," Ben said, forcing a smile. His eyes flicked to the man, who stood there confidently, offering a polite nod. "This is Marcus," Sarah said quickly. "He's helping me with some new promotional ideas for the bakery." Marcus extended a hand. "Nice to meet you. Ben, Sarah's mentioned how supportive you've been of her work." Ben shook his hand, his grip firm. "Nice to meet you too." The conversation that followed was polite, but Ben couldn't shake the unease that settled over him. He left the bakery with a box of Sarah's signature cupcakes and a heavy heart. That night, Sarah was quieter than usual. Ben tried to bring up the anniversary trip again, but she changed the subject to a new pastry recipe she was working on. As she spoke, Ben nodded along, but his mind was elsewhere. A few days later, as their anniversary approached, Ben decided to dig deeper. It wasn't something he had ever done before, but his instincts told him something wasn't right. While Sarah was in the shower, he picked up her phone. It was locked, of course, but he noticed a notification pop up, a message from Marcus. It read, "Can't stop thinking about you. Let's meet again soon." Ben's heart sank. He set the phone back down, his hands trembling. The words played over and over in his mind. He wanted to confront Sarah immediately, but he knew he needed more than a single message to get to the truth. The following day, Ben called in sick to work and parked his car a block away from the bakery. He waited, watching the comings and goings of customers and employees. Hours passed, and then he saw it. Sarah and Marcus leaving together. They got into Marcus's car and drove off. Ben followed at a distance, his heart pounding. They pulled into a small cafe on the edge of town. Through the window, Ben watched as they sat at a corner table, their heads close together. Marcus reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand in his. Ben's worst fears were confirmed. He drove home, his mind racing. The woman he had loved for over a decade, the one he had built his life around, was keeping secrets. And now, he had to decide what to do next. Ben sat on the living room couch, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him like an anchor. He stared blankly at the wall, his mind replaying the scene at the cafe. Marcus's hand on Sarah's, the look in her eyes. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the shattering of a trust he had spent years building. He felt numb, yet the anger bubbling under the surface was impossible to ignore. Later that evening, Sarah returned home, her cheerful, "I'm back." Echoing through the quiet house, Ben forced himself to act normal, greeting her with a strained smile. "How was the bakery?" he asked, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. "Busy as always," Sarah replied, avoiding his gaze as she unpacked groceries on the counter. "But productive. We're finalizing plans for the spring menu." Ben nodded, observing her every move. He wanted to confront her right then and there, but decided against it. He needed more time, a better strategy. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about understanding why this had happened. Over the next few days, Ben became more observant. He noticed Sarah's increased attention to her appearance, how she lingered over her makeup in the mornings and chose outfits she hadn't worn in years. She smiled more often, but not at him, her laughter reserved for the texts she tried to hide. It was as if she were living in two worlds, one with him and another with Marcus. The tension between them was growing, though Sarah either didn't notice or refused to acknowledge it. Ben's usual patience was being replaced by sharp comments and uncharacteristic coldness. When Sarah suggested they postpone the anniversary trip due to work commitments, Ben didn't argue. He simply nodded, his thoughts elsewhere. That weekend, while Sarah claimed to be working late at the bakery, Ben decided to dig deeper. He drove to the cafe where he had seen her with Marcus, hoping to confirm his suspicions. Sure enough, their cars were parked outside. Through the window, he saw them sitting together again, their body language unmistakable. This time, Marcus leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from Sarah's face. Ben clenched his fists, resisting the urge to barge in. Instead, he drove home and started gathering evidence. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was for closure, or perhaps to confront Sarah with undeniable proof. He scoured through their shared bank statements and found unusual charges. High-end dinners, hotel stays, and gifts that Sarah had never mentioned. It was a painful confirmation, but one he needed to see for himself. The turning point came a few nights later. Sarah was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the bedside table. Ben hesitated for a moment, before picking it up. The lock screen displayed a new message from Marcus. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wish we didn't have to sneak around." Ben's chest tightened. His hand trembled as he placed the phone back down, careful not to make a sound. Any lingering doubts were gone now. The truth was, staring him in the face, raw and undeniable. The next morning, Ben confronted Sarah. He waited until she was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, he almost felt guilty for what he was about to do. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but firm. Sarah looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "What's wrong?" Ben placed a printout of their recent bank statements on the table, alongside a copy of the message he had seen on her phone. "I know about Marcus," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I know everything." Sarah's face turned pale. She stared at the evidence, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. "Ben, Don't," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't lie to me. I've seen you with him. I've read the messages. I just want to know why." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she buried her face in her hands. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered. I was lonely, Ben. I felt like we were just going through the motions, like you didn't see me anymore." Ben's anger flared. "So your solution was to run to another man to sneak around behind my back instead of talking to me?" "I didn't want to hurt you," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I didn't know how to tell you how I felt." "Well, congratulations," Ben replied bitterly. "You've hurt me more than I ever thought possible." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah sobbed quietly, while Ben stared at the table, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to walk out and never look back, but another part of him still loved her. The woman he had fallen for years ago was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the mistakes and deceit. After what felt like an eternity, Ben spoke again. "Do you love him?" Sarah hesitated, her silence speaking louder than any words could. Ben's heart sank. "I need some time," he said, standing up. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Sarah, but I need to think." He left the house, driving aimlessly until he found himself at the lakeside cabin they had planned to visit for their anniversary. Sitting on the porch, he reflected on their years together, the good times, the challenges, and the betrayal that now overshadowed it all. He wondered if their marriage could survive this, or if it was already too late. Back at home, Sarah was grappling with her own guilt and regret. She called Marcus, her voice trembling. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "Ben knows, and I can't keep lying to him. It's over." Marcus tried to persuade her otherwise, but Sarah was resolute. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, and that the only chance she had of salvaging her marriage was to cut ties with him completely. Ben returned the next day, his expression unreadable. Sarah was waiting for him, her eyes red from crying. "I ended it," she said quietly. "I told Marcus it's over." Ben nodded but didn't respond. He knew words alone wouldn't heal the wound she had inflicted. Actions would speak louder. Over the next few weeks, they began the painful process of rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, is difficult to restore. Ben struggled to let go of his anger, while Sarah worked tirelessly to prove her commitment to making things right. Counseling sessions became a regular part of their routine, helping them navigate the complicated emotions they were both experiencing. As time passed, the pain began to fade, replaced by a cautious hope. They weren't the same couple they had been before the betrayal, but they were learning to find their way back to each other, one step at a time. Remember to like, share, and comment if this story resonated with you. And don't forget to subscribe for more captivating stories about life's toughest challenges and the strength it takes to overcome them. The weeks after Ben's confrontation with Sarah were anything but calm. Though they were attending counseling and trying to rebuild their trust, the cracks in their relationship were still deep and raw. Ben struggled to reconcile the woman he loved with the one who had betrayed him. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed desperate to prove she was committed to repairing the damage, but guilt and uncertainty hung heavy in the air. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Sarah spoke up hesitantly. "I think we should talk about selling the bakery." Ben looked at her, surprised. "What, the bakery is your dream?" "I know," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "but it's also where this all started. Every time I'm there, I feel ashamed. I think it might be better for us if I let it go and focus on us." Ben sighed, torn between empathy and lingering resentment. "That's a big decision, Sarah. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied, her eyes welling with tears. "I want to make things right, Ben, even if it means starting over." While her offer was heartfelt, it wasn't enough to erase Ben's doubts. The message from Marcus, the sight of them together at the cafe, it all haunted him. Despite Sarah's assurances that it was over, a part of him feared Marcus wasn't ready to let her go. His fears were confirmed when, a few days later, Ben received an anonymous message on social media. It was a photograph of Sarah and Marcus at the cafe, clearly taken during one of their secret meetings. Below it was a single line of text. "You'll never know the whole truth." Ben's chest tightened as he stared at the screen. The message reignited every doubt, every fear he had tried to suppress. Was there more to their relationship than Sarah had admitted, and who had sent the photo? Was it Marcus? Someone else who knew them? The questions gnawed at him, and he knew he couldn't ignore them. That night, Ben confronted Sarah again, holding up his phone. "Explain this," he demanded. Sarah's face went pale as she saw the photo. "Ben, I swear, I don't know who sent this. It's from before I ended things with Marcus." "Before you ended things," Ben repeated, his voice laced with bitterness. "So there is more I don't know." "No," Sarah insisted, tears streaming down her face. "I told you everything I don't know who sent that. But it's not what you think." "How can I believe you?" Ben said, his voice rising. "You've already lied to me once. What if there's more you're keeping from me?" Sarah broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't know what else to say, Ben. I've done everything I can to prove I'm sorry. If you can't trust me, then maybe there's nothing left to save." Her words cut deep, but Ben couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was far from over. He spent the next few days in a haze, consumed by anger and suspicion. He began digging deeper, searching for any clues that might reveal the truth about Sarah and Marcus's relationship. One afternoon, while scrolling through old emails, Ben found something that made his blood run cold. A message from Marcus to Sarah, buried in her archived folder, read, "I can't wait until we're finally free to be together." Ben's hands trembled as he read the email. It was dated just 2 weeks before their confrontation. Free to be together? He muttered to himself, his heart pounding. Had Marcus been planning to take Sarah away from him? And if so, what was stopping him now? Fueled by anger and a need for answers, Ben decided to confront Marcus directly. He knew it was risky, but he couldn't let this man linger like a shadow over his life. He found Marcus's address through a mutual acquaintance and drove there one evening, his mind racing with what he would say, or do. When Marcus opened the door, he looked surprised, but not intimidated. "Ben," he said coolly, "what brings you here?" "You know damn well why I'm here," Ben replied, stepping closer. "I want answers. What were you planning with Sarah? What did you mean by free to be together?" Marcus smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Ah, that I figured she might not have told you everything." "Cut the games," Ben growled. "If you have something to say it." Marcus's expression hardened. "Sarah and I had plans, yes, but she chose you. She made her decision, and I've respected that. If you're here to blame me for your failing marriage, don't bother. Look in the mirror." Ben's fist clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Don't act innocent. I know you sent that photo. Why are you still trying to interfere?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Photo. What photo?" Ben's anger faltered, replaced by confusion. Was Marcus telling the truth, or was this another manipulation? Before he could press further, Marcus stepped back inside. "Whatever you're dealing with, it's not my problem anymore. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." The door slammed shut, leaving Ben standing on the porch, his thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and frustration. If Marcus wasn't the one sending the messages, then who was, and why? When Ben returned home, Sarah was waiting for him, her expression a mix of worry and exhaustion. "Where were you?" she asked softly. "I went to see Marcus," Ben admitted. Sarah's face fell. "Why would you do that?" "Because I needed answers," Ben said, his voice heavy, "but now I have more questions than ever." Sarah stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Ben, please, we can't keep doing this. If we're going to move forward, we have to let go of the past." Ben looked into her tearful eyes, torn between his love for her and the pain she had caused. "I don't know if I can," he said honestly. "Not until I know the truth." As the days passed, the messages continued. Photos, cryptic texts, even anonymous emails, all hinting at secrets Sarah hadn't revealed. The tension between them reached a boiling point, and both of them knew that something had to give. One night, as Ben sat alone in the living room, his phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was a video, a grainy recording of Sarah and Marcus at the cafe, their conversation barely audible, but intimate enough to reignite Ben's fury. At the end of the video, the camera panned to reveal the person filming. Emily, Sarah's assistant at the bakery. Ben's heart sank. Emily had been working closely with Sarah for years, helping her build the bakery into a success. Why would she do this? Was she trying to sabotage Sarah, or was there something more sinister at play? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Ben confronted Emily the next morning at the bakery. She looked startled as he walked in, his expression dark and unyielding. "Emily," he said, his voice cold, "we need to talk." "Ben," she stammered, "what's going on?" "You know exactly what's going on," he said, holding up his phone. "I know you've been sending the messages." "Why?" Emily's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked genuinely afraid, but then her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms defensively. "Because someone needed to tell you the truth," she said. "Sarah didn't deserve to get away with what she did." Ben was taken aback by the venom in her voice. What are you talking about? She lied to you, Ben, Emily continued. Not just about Marcus, but about everything. The bakery, her so-called success. It's all built on lies, and I couldn't stand watching her pretend to be this perfect wife while she destroyed everything you had. Ben stared at her, stunned. What lies? What are you talking about? Emily hesitated, then pulled out a folder from behind the counter. Take this, she said, handing it to him. You'll see for yourself. Ben opened the folder, his heart sinking as he scanned the documents inside: financial records, emails, and contracts, all pointing to a web of deceit that went far beyond an affair. Sarah had been embezzling money from the bakery's accounts, using it to cover personal expenses and fund her time with Marcus. When Ben confronted Sarah with the evidence, she broke down completely. The facade she had carefully maintained for years crumbled before his eyes. She admitted everything: the affair, the financial deceit, and the desperation that had driven her to it. I was scared, Ben, she said through her sobs. I didn't want to lose you, but I didn't know how to fix what I'd done. Ben's anger boiled over. You didn't want to lose me. You destroyed us, Sarah. You lied to me, stole from me, and betrayed everything we built together. Sarah fell to her knees, pleading for forgiveness. But Ben couldn't find it in his heart to offer it. I need space, he said, his voice cold and distant. I can't do this anymore. As Ben walked out of the house, he felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The truth had finally come to light, but it had come at a cost. His marriage, his trust, and the life he had envisioned with Sarah were gone. Ben's decision to leave wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of a storm he couldn't have anticipated. Walking out of the house gave him temporary relief, but it left Sarah in a state of complete disarray. She spent hours trying to call him, leaving voicemails that alternated between apologies and desperate pleas for a chance to explain. But Ben didn't answer. He needed clarity, space to think about everything he had uncovered and what it meant for his future. As the days stretched into weeks, Ben found himself staying with an old friend, Tom, a former colleague from his teaching days. Tom's quiet home on the edge of town was a welcome refuge, a place where Ben could process the betrayal without the constant reminders of his shattered marriage. You can stay as long as you need, Tom said one evening as they shared a beer on the back porch, but eventually, you're going to have to decide: either you confront Sarah and figure out if there's anything left to salvage, or you let it all go. Ben sighed, staring at the horizon. I don't even know where to start, Tom. The lies, the affair, the money. Every time I think I've reached the bottom, there's something worse. Then maybe it's not about starting, Tom replied. Maybe it's about ending. You deserve closure, Ben, one way or another. That word, closure, stuck with Ben. It felt impossible to achieve, yet he knew he couldn't move forward without it. One evening, Ben received an unexpected call from Emily. Her voice was sharp, tinged with panic. Ben, we need to talk. It's about Sarah. What now? Ben asked, his frustration evident. It's Marcus, Emily said. He's threatening her. I don't know all the details, but he's demanding money and saying he'll go public with everything if she doesn't pay up. Ben felt his stomach drop. Why are you telling me this? Because I know you still care about her, even if you don't want to admit it, Emily said. She's in over her head, Ben. And if Marcus follows through, it's not just her reputation that'll be ruined. It's yours too. Ben hung up without responding, his mind racing. Despite everything, he couldn't ignore the thought of Sarah being in danger. He had to confront this head-on, if only to protect himself from being dragged down further. The next day, Ben arranged to meet Sarah at the house. When he arrived, he found her sitting in the living room, looking more fragile than he had ever seen her. The confident, vibrant woman he had once loved was now a shadow of herself. her eyes red from crying. "Emily called me," Ben said, breaking the silence. "She told me about Marcus." Sarah's lip trembled, and she nodded. "He's been calling and texting non-stop. He wants more money. Says he'll ruin both of us if I don't give it to him." Ben's anger flared. "You should have come to me sooner instead. You let this spiral out of control." "I didn't know how to tell you," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After everything I've already done. I didn't think you'd care." Ben ran a hand through his hair, his frustration mounting. "You're right. I shouldn't care. But here we are. What does Marcus want?" "He's demanding $50,000, Sarah said. "He knows I don't have it, but he said he'll expose everything, the affair, the embezzlement, if I don't pay." Ben sat down across from her, his mind racing. He hated the position she had put him in, but he couldn't ignore the fact that Marcus's threats could destroy both of their lives. "Here's what we're going to do," Ben said, his tone firm. "We're going to call his bluff. He doesn't have as much power as he thinks. But first, we need to gather every piece of evidence we have. Texts, emails, bank statements, everything that shows what he's been doing." Sarah nodded, a glimmer of hope breaking through her despair. "You really think we can stop him?" "We have to," Ben said. "I'm not letting him ruin my life any more than you already have." That night, Ben and Sarah worked together to compile everything they could find on Marcus. It was a strange and tense collaboration, filled with moments of awkward silence and unspoken tension. For Ben, it felt like walking a tightrope between his lingering anger and the realization that, despite it all, he still cared about Sarah. The next morning, Ben took their findings to a lawyer. He explained the situation, leaving out no details about the affair or Sarah's involvement in the financial mismanagement of the bakery. The lawyer leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "You've got a strong case against Marcus. Blackmail is a serious crime, and if we can prove he's been threatening you, we can shut this down, but you need to be prepared for the fallout. This won't be pretty, and it's going to take time." Ben nodded. "I just want to put an end to this." As the legal process began, Marcus's true nature started to surface. He escalated his threats, sending Sarah increasingly aggressive messages, and even showing up at the bakery unannounced. But Ben and Sarah stood their ground, refusing to give in to his demands. The turning point came when Ben received a call from the lawyer. "We've got him," the lawyer said. "Marcus slipped up. He sent a message explicitly threatening to leak information unless Sarah paid him. That's all we need to press charges." Relief washed over Ben, but it was quickly followed by a sense of finality. While Marcus's threats were now being handled legally, the damage to his marriage couldn't be undone. A few weeks later, Marcus was arrested. The news spread quickly through Maplewood, and while some whispered about the scandal, most people rallied around Sarah. She publicly apologized for her mistakes, stepping down from her role at the bakery and pledging to make amends. Ben, however, knew that his path lay elsewhere. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their house, he turned to Sarah with a heavy heart. "I think it's time we go our separate ways," he said. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I understand. I just want you to know how sorry I am. For everything." Ben placed a hand on hers briefly before standing. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." As Ben walked away from the house for the last time, he felt a mix of sadness and relief. The chapter with Sarah was over, but it had taught him something important: the strength to rebuild, even after everything seemed lost. If this story has gripped you, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Let us know your thoughts below. What would you have done in Ben's shoes? Ben's decision to separate from Sarah didn't ease the storm brewing in his mind. Walking away from the house felt final, but the weight of unresolved questions still clung to him. Could he truly move on without understanding the full extent of what had happened? Despite his efforts to focus on rebuilding his life, the remnants of Sarah's betrayal and Marcus's threats haunted him. As Marcus's legal battle gained traction, new evidence surfaced. Marcus wasn't just a manipulative charmer, he was also deeply entangled in financial crimes. The local news exploded with reports of his fraudulent schemes, and his connection to Sarah added fuel to the fire. Every headline seemed to tarnish the memories Ben had of the life they once shared. Meanwhile, Sarah, now living alone, had thrown herself into repairing her reputation. She started volunteering at a community center and organizing charity events, determined to rebuild not just her life, but her identity. Though Ben had walked away, she knew her journey of redemption wasn't about winning him back. It was about proving to herself and the world that she could change. One evening, as Ben sat in his friend Tom's living room, scrolling through the latest news, his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but something compelled him to pick up. "Ben Shepherd?" a deep voice on the other end asked. "Who's this?" Ben replied cautiously. "This is Detective Harris. I'm handling the Marcus Reed case. There's something you need to see." Ben's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "I'd rather explain in person. Can you meet me at the station tomorrow morning?" The call left Ben uneasy, his mind racing with possibilities. What more could there be? He spent a restless night replaying the events of the past few months, dreading what new revelation might await him. The next morning, Ben arrived at the station, where Detective Harris greeted him with a firm handshake. He led Ben to a small, dimly lit room and placed a file on the table. "We've been digging deeper into Marcus's activities," Harris began. "During the investigation, we came across some communications that you need to see." Ben opened the file and felt his stomach drop. Inside were transcripts of emails between Marcus and another individual, detailing not just their affair, but a more sinister plan. Marcus had been plotting to manipulate Sarah into signing over control of the bakery under the guise of financial assistance. Once he had access, he planned to embezzle money and leave Sarah to take the fall. Ben's hands trembled as he read through the transcripts. It wasn't just betrayal. It was exploitation. Marcus had seen Sarah's vulnerabilities and used them to his advantage, weaving a web of lies to trap her. "He's a master manipulator," Harris said, his tone grim. "But the good news is, with this evidence, we can strengthen the case against him." Ben nodded, his emotions a mix of anger and pity. Sarah had made terrible choices, but she had also been a pawn in Marcus's larger scheme. The realization didn't absolve her of guilt, but it added a layer of complexity to the situation that Ben couldn't ignore. When Ben left the station, he found himself driving toward the community center, where Sarah was volunteering. He didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps a lingering sense of responsibility. Either way, he needed to confront her with what he had learned. When he arrived, he spotted Sarah in the garden, helping a group of children plant flowers. She looked different, calmer, more grounded. But the sight of her still stirred a whirlwind of emotions in Ben. "Sarah," he called out, his voice cutting through the chatter of the children. She looked up, startled, and quickly excused herself from the group. "Ben," she said, approaching him cautiously, "what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said, his tone firm. They walked to a quiet bench under a tree, where Ben handed her a copy of the transcripts. As Sarah read through them, her face paled, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I knew Marcus was selfish, but I didn't realize he was capable of this." Ben studied her reaction, searching for any hint of deceit, but all he saw was genuine remorse. "I'm not here to excuse what you did," he said, "but I thought you deserved to know the truth." Sarah wiped her eyes, her expression a mixture of guilt and gratitude. Thank you, Ben, for telling me I don't know how to make up for everything I've done, but I'm trying. Ben nodded, standing up. I hope you are, for your sake. As he walked away, Sarah called after him. Ben, wait. He turned, his expression unreadable. I just want you to know. I'm sorry for everything. Not just the affair, but for not being the person you deserved. Ben nodded, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Take care of yourself, Sarah. For the first time since their separation, Ben felt a sense of closure. The truth had come to light, and while it didn't erase the pain, it gave him the clarity he needed to move forward. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of it. Ben threw himself into his work, finding solace in his students, and the sense of purpose teaching gave him. He also started going to therapy, working through the lingering effects of the betrayal, and learning to rebuild his confidence. Sarah, meanwhile, continued her journey of redemption. She sold the bakery and used the proceeds to start a non-profit organization dedicated to helping women in abusive or manipulative relationships, a cause that resonated deeply with her newfound sense of purpose. As for Marcus, his trial became the talk of the town. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was ultimately sentenced to several years in prison for fraud, blackmail, and other charges. It was a small victory, but one that brought a sense of justice to those he had wronged. Though their paths had diverged, Ben and Sarah's story served as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. They had both faced their darkest moments and emerged stronger, albeit in different ways. If you've been captivated by this story of love, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping tales. Share your thoughts below. Do you think Ben made the right decision? What would you have done in his shoes? As the trial against Marcus gained momentum, the ripple effects of his crimes sent shockwaves through the community. For Ben, the experience was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was a relief to see justice catching up to the man who had upended his life. On the other, the trial forced him to relive the betrayal, stirring up emotions he thought he had begun to bury. Meanwhile, Sarah's transformation continued to draw attention. Her non-profit organization, aptly named New Beginnings, was rapidly gaining traction, providing support to women who had been manipulated or abused by powerful individuals like Marcus. Though she faced skepticism from some, Sarah's tireless dedication began to earn her respect and even admiration. But the closer the trial came to its conclusion, the more tense and volatile Marcus became. Even behind bars, he managed to send veiled threats, warning Sarah that exposing him further would bring consequences she couldn't imagine. One morning, Ben received a call from Detective Harris. Ben, we've received credible information that Marcus may have arranged for someone on the outside to target Sarah. We're increasing security around her, but I thought you should know. The news sent a chill through Ben. Despite everything, the idea of Sarah being in danger was unbearable. He debated calling her, but after their last conversation, he wasn't sure if it was his place to step in. Instead, he found himself driving past her office, scanning the area for anything suspicious. Later that evening, Sarah called him, her voice trembling. Ben, I think someone's following me. I've noticed the same car parked outside my office for the past few days, and tonight it was outside my apartment. Did you call the police? Ben asked, his concern evident. They said they'd send someone to check, but I can't shake the feeling that something's going to happen, she replied. Ben hesitated for only a moment before making a decision. I'll come over, stay inside, and keep the doors locked. When Ben arrived, he found Sarah visibly shaken. Her hands trembled as she recounted the strange occurrences of the past week. The car, the shadowy figure she thought she saw outside her window, and the unsettling phone calls where the caller would hang up as soon as she answered. This is Marcus's doing, Ben said, pacing the room. Even from jail, he's trying to control you. I thought I was done with him, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I've done everything to move on, but he won't let me. Ben clenched his fists, the protective instincts he had tried to suppress coming back in full force. We're not going to let him win. I'll stay here tonight, and tomorrow we'll talk to Detective Harris. If Marcus is behind this, we'll make sure he's stopped for good. The next day, Ben and Sarah met with Harris, who assured them that extra security measures were being put in place. Marcus thrives on fear, Harris said. He's counting on you to crumble. Don't give him that satisfaction. Though the added security brought some relief, the tension remained high. Sarah tried to maintain her composure, focusing on her work at New Beginnings. But the constant feeling of being watched took its toll. Ben, unable to ignore the lingering connection he felt to her, found himself stepping in more frequently, checking in on her, walking her to her car, and even staying at her apartment on nights when she felt particularly vulnerable. One night, as they sat in her living room, the weight of the situation seemed to catch up to both of them. I never wanted to drag you back into this, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. You deserve better than this mess. Ben sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not about what I deserve. It's about making sure you're safe. Whatever's happened between us, I can't just stand by and do nothing. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years they had spent together felt like a bridge between the pain of the past and the uncertainty of the present. But before either of them could say more, the sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. Ben leapt to his feet, his adrenaline spiking. Stay here, he ordered, moving toward the noise. In the kitchen, he found a shattered window and a brick lying on the floor. Attached to it was a note, scrawled in jagged handwriting. This isn't over. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face pale. What does it say? She asked, her voice trembling. Ben showed her the note, his jaw tight. We're calling the police now. The police arrived quickly, taking the note as evidence and inspecting the area for any signs of the perpetrator. Though they promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood, the incident left Sarah shaken to her core. In the days that followed, Ben and Sarah became more determined than ever to see Marcus held accountable for his actions. Sarah, though scared, refused to let fear dictate her life. She began speaking out more publicly, sharing her story in interviews, and using her platform to raise awareness about the tactics manipulators like Marcus used to exploit their victims. For Ben, seeing Sarah's resilience stirred conflicting emotions. He admired her courage, but it also reminded him of why he had fallen in love with her in the first place, a realization that left him grappling with feelings he thought he had buried. The trial reached its climax, with Sarah taking the stand to testify against Marcus. The courtroom was tense, every eye fixed on her as she recounted her experiences with unwavering honesty. Marcus, seated at the defense table, glared at her with cold fury. But Sarah didn't falter. When the verdict was finally delivered, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, blackmail, and intimidation, there was a palpable sense of relief. Marcus was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, ensuring that he would no longer pose a threat to anyone. As the courtroom emptied, Sarah and Ben stood side by side, the weight of the ordeal finally lifting. It's over, Sarah said, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and relief. Ben nodded, a faint smile on his lips. Yeah, it's over. For the first time in months, they both felt a sense of peace, a fragile but promising beginning to a new chapter. If this gripping story of betrayal, redemption, and resilience kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more unforgettable tales. What would you do in Ben's situation? Let us know your thoughts below. As Marcus's sentencing approached, the pressure on Sarah and Ben intensified. Marcus's arrest and trial had done little to silence his reach. His associates on the outside continued to sow fear, leaving both Sarah and Ben constantly on edge. The sense of victory from the courtroom was beginning to feel like a hollow triumph. One evening, as Ben prepared to leave Sarah's apartment after another check-in, Sarah stopped him at the door. "Ben," she said softly, "I don't think I can do this alone anymore." He turned to her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. "You're not alone," he said. "The police are watching. The trial is almost over. This is almost behind you." "But what about after?" she asked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can rebuild my life. I can try to make amends. But I don't know if I can ever feel safe again. And I'm not sure if I want to do this without you." Ben's chest tightened at her words. He wanted to comfort her, to promise that everything would be okay, but he also knew the enormity of what she was asking. He had worked so hard to move on, to find peace in the wake of their shattered marriage. Could he allow himself to step back into the fire? Before he could respond, the sound of a loud crash from outside shattered the moment Ben and Sarah rushed to the window to see a car speeding away, leaving behind a flaming pile of debris at the edge of the driveway. The unmistakable glow of fire reflected in their horrified eyes. "They're trying to scare us," Ben said, already grabbing his phone to call the police. "But we're not going to let them win." The police arrived quickly, extinguishing the fire and securing the scene. The flaming pile turned out to be a stack of newspapers soaked in gasoline, with another threatening note tucked inside. "Keep quiet, or else." For Sarah, it was a breaking point. The terror and uncertainty that had plagued her for months finally erupted into raw emotion. She sobbed openly, her shoulders shaking as she clung to Ben. "I can't take this anymore," she cried. "I just want it to end." Ben wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. "We're going to get through this," he said, his voice steady. "But you have to trust me. We can't let fear control us." The next day, Sarah and Ben met with Detective Harris once again. Laying out the latest incident, Harris listened intently, his expression growing darker with every detail. "We've been monitoring Marcus's known associates," Harris said. "It's clear they're escalating. But we've also uncovered something that might help us put an end to this." He slid a folder across the table, revealing photos and documents that detailed Marcus's connection to a larger criminal network. "These people are dangerous," Harris continued, "but they're also sloppy. If we can use this information to leverage a deal with Marcus, we might be able to neutralize the threat." Sarah hesitated, her fear evident. "You want us to rely on Marcus after everything he's done?" "It's not about trusting Marcus," Harris said. "It's about cutting off his power. If he cooperates, it'll dismantle the network and remove the people targeting you." Ben and Sarah exchanged a look, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Agreeing to Harris's plan meant placing their faith in a man who had done nothing but harm them, but it also offered a chance to finally end the nightmare. "I'll do it," Sarah said finally, her voice trembling but resolute. "If it means keeping us safe, I'll do whatever it takes." The plan was set in motion. Harris arranged for a meeting with Marcus's lawyer, presenting the evidence and outlining the terms of the deal. In exchange for cooperation, Marcus would receive a reduced sentence and protection for himself and his family. Though reluctant at first, Marcus eventually agreed, realizing it was his only way out. As Marcus began to provide information, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. His criminal network was more extensive than anyone had realized, involving money laundering, extortion, and ties to other high-profile cases. The revelations not only strengthened the case against his associates, but also painted a clearer picture of the depth of his manipulation. For Sarah, hearing the details was both a relief and a painful reminder of how deeply she had been ensnared. She spent sleepless nights reflecting on her choices, the mistakes that had led her here, and the toll it had taken on her and Ben. Meanwhile, Ben struggled with his own emotions. Though the immediate threat was diminishing, the scars of the ordeal remained. He couldn't ignore the way his protective instincts had kicked in, the way he had been drawn back into Sarah's life despite his efforts to move on. As the trial neared its conclusion, Ben and Sarah found themselves drawn closer together, united by the shared trauma and the fight for justice. Their conversations became more candid, their walls slowly coming down as they confronted the pain and regret that had defined their relationship for so long. One evening, as they sat together on Sarah's couch, she turned to him with a tentative smile. "Do you ever think about what might have been if I hadn't done what I did?" Ben sighed, his gaze distant. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "But the truth is, we can't change the past. All we can do is figure out where to go from here." Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Ben. For everything I know, I've said it before, but I need you to know how much I mean it." "I know," Ben said softly, "and I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We both have a lot of healing to do." Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call from Detective Harris. "We've done it," Harris said. "Marcus's testimony has led to multiple arrests. The network is collapsing." The news was a turning point, a moment of triumph that marked the beginning of the end. For the first time in months, Ben and Sarah felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that they could finally reclaim their lives. The final days of the trial were a whirlwind of emotions. Marcus's associates were sentenced, and Sarah's testimony proved pivotal in securing their convictions. The courtroom erupted in applause as the judge delivered the final verdict, bringing a sense of closure that had once seemed impossible. As they walked out of the courthouse, Sarah turned to Ben, her expression a mixture of gratitude and determination. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you." "You don't have to," Ben replied. "Just keep moving forward." The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, they felt like they were standing on solid ground. Together or apart, they knew they had the strength to face whatever came next. If this story of betrayal, resilience, and redemption has moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Share your thoughts below. What would you have done in their shoes? The courtroom was packed as the final day of Marcus's trial unfolded. The culmination of months of investigation, sleepless nights, and countless emotional battles was about to reach its peak. Tension filled the air as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, every eye in the room fixed on Marcus, who sat stoically at the defendant's table. Sarah sat in the front row, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. Beside her, Ben exuded a calm resolve, but his clenched jaw and narrowed eyes betrayed the emotions churning inside him. This wasn't just about Marcus's fate. It was about justice, closure, and reclaiming the sense of security that Marcus had stolen from so many. The judge's gavel fell, and the courtroom fell silent. On the charges of fraud, blackmail, and conspiracy, the defendant, Marcus Reed, is found guilty. A collective exhale rippled through the courtroom, followed by a smattering of quiet applause. For Sarah, it was a moment of vindication, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would have to rebuild her life without the shadows of Marcus looming over her. As Marcus was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his gaze briefly met Sarah's. His expression was unreadable. Was it anger, regret, or simply resignation? Sarah wasn't sure, and she realized she didn't care. She had spent too long trying to interpret his manipulations, and she was done giving him space in her mind. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing as they bombarded Sarah with questions. "Miss Porter, how do you feel about the verdict? What's next for you? Do you think justice was served?" Ben stepped forward, shielding Sarah from the crowd. "No comment," he said firmly, guiding her toward his car. As they drove away, the weight of the moment began to sink in. Sarah stared out the window, her reflection blending with the passing cityscape. "It's really over," she said softly, almost as if she didn't believe it. It is, Ben replied. But now comes the hard part, figuring out what comes next. For Ben, the trial's conclusion marked the end of his involvement in Sarah's battle. He had been by her side through the worst of it, but now he was ready to focus on his own life. Yet, as much as he wanted to move forward, a part of him struggled to let go of the connection they had rebuilt during the ordeal. A week after the trial, Ben received an invitation from Sarah. She was hosting an event for New Beginnings to celebrate the success of the organization and to honor the women it had helped. Though hesitant at first, Ben decided to attend. He wanted to support her, but he also needed to see if their story had any remaining threads to tie up. The event was held at a local community center, its modest decor transformed by warm lighting and colorful banners. Sarah stood near the entrance, greeting guests with a genuine smile that was worlds apart from the woman Ben had seen months ago. She radiated a quiet strength, her confidence no longer tied to anyone else's validation. "Ben," she said, her eyes lighting up as he approached. "You came." "I wouldn't miss it," he replied, his tone soft but sincere. Throughout the evening, Ben watched Sarah interact with the attendees, her passion for the cause evident in every conversation. She was in her element, and it was clear that New Beginnings wasn't just a project, it was her purpose. As the night wound down, Sarah found Ben standing near the refreshment table, a faraway look in his eyes. "Penny for your thoughts," she asked, offering him a glass of sparkling water. He chuckled, taking the glass. "Just thinking about how far you've come. This suits you." "Thanks," she said, her expression turning thoughtful. "You know, I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have," he said, his voice steady. "You just needed to find your way." They stood in silence for a moment, the unspoken words between them filling the space. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I know we've been through a lot, and I don't expect things to go back to the way they were, but I hope we can at least be friends. You've been such a big part of my life, and I don't want to lose that." Ben considered her words, the memories of their shared history flashing through his mind. "I think we can do that," he said, "but it's going to take time." "I understand," she replied, her smile tinged with sadness but also hope. "Thank you for being here tonight. It means a lot." As Ben left the event, he felt a sense of closure beginning to settle. Their relationship had been tested, broken, and reshaped into something different. It wasn't what either of them had envisioned when they first fell in love, but it was honest, and that was enough. In the following months, both Ben and Sarah focused on rebuilding their lives. Ben poured himself into his teaching, finding fulfillment in helping his students navigate their own challenges. Sarah continued to expand New Beginnings, her work gaining recognition on a national level. Though their paths diverged, they remained in touch, their connection evolving into a friendship built on mutual respect and shared experiences. They had faced the storm together and come out stronger on the other side. If this story of redemption, resilience, and personal growth inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful tales. What did you think of Sarah and Ben's journey? Let us know in the comments below. In the weeks following Marcus's sentencing, life began to settle into a new rhythm for both Ben and Sarah. The chaos and fear that had once consumed their days were now replaced by quiet moments of reflection and rebuilding. Though the scars of their shared journey remained, they each found ways to move forward. For Sarah, the end of the trial marked the beginning of her true redemption. With Marcus out of her life and the threat of his associates neutralized, she was finally free to focus on new beginnings. The non-profit continued to grow, attracting support from prominent figures and expanding its reach to help women across the country. One sunny afternoon, Sarah stood on the steps of the community center where New Beginnings had started, addressing a crowd of supporters. Her voice was strong, her words carrying the weight of her experience. Today isn't just about what we've overcome, she said. It's about what we're building. A future where no one has to face their struggles alone. I've made mistakes, but those mistakes have taught me the power of resilience and the importance of hope. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah's gaze lingered on one familiar face in the audience, Ben. He stood near the back, a small smile on his lips as he clapped along with the others. Though their romantic relationship had ended, their bond remained, now rooted in mutual respect and understanding. After the event, Sarah approached Ben, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. "You've done something incredible here, Sarah. You should be proud." She smiled, the warmth in his words filling the cracks in her heart. "It means a lot hearing that from you." As they walked together toward the parking lot, Sarah hesitated, then turned to Ben. "Do you ever regret helping me through all of this, after everything I put you through?" Ben paused, considering her question. "No," he said finally. "It wasn't easy, but I think it was necessary for both of us, and I don't regret seeing you become the person you were always meant to be." Sarah blinked back tears, nodding. "Thank you for everything." Their parting that day felt different, less like an ending, and more like the start of two new journeys. They both knew their paths would continue to diverge, but there was comfort in knowing they had helped each other find the strength to move forward. For Ben, life returned to a simpler pace. His days were filled with teaching, mentoring students, and rediscovering the parts of himself that had been overshadowed by the turmoil of the past year. He took up running again, a hobby he had abandoned during the height of the chaos, finding solace in the steady rhythm of his footsteps against the pavement. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ben sat on his porch with a notebook in hand. He had started journaling, a habit his therapist had recommended to help him process his emotions. Flipping through the pages, he realized how far he had come. The entries from the early days were filled with anger and confusion, each word heavy with pain. But as he read on, he saw a gradual shift hope had crept in, alongside gratitude for the lessons he had learned. It wasn't a perfect journey, but it was his, and that made it worth embracing. Meanwhile, Sarah's work with New Beginnings brought her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Each woman she helped reminded her of her own struggles and the strength it took to rise above them. She had found her calling, and it filled her days with meaning. One day, while sorting through donations at the nonprofit's new headquarters, Sarah came across an old photograph. It was a picture of her and Ben from their early days of marriage, their faces lit with laughter and love. She stared at it for a long moment, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. Sarah carefully placed the photo in a drawer, knowing it wasn't something she needed to hold on to anymore. It was a part of her past, a chapter that had shaped her but no longer defined her. She was ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. Months later, Ben and Sarah crossed paths again, this time at a charity gala for New Beginnings. The event was a grand affair. With glittering lights and elegant decor, Ben had been invited as a guest, his connection to Sarah's journey making him an honorary part of the non-profit's success. As they caught up over glasses of sparkling cider, Sarah shared stories of the women she had helped, her eyes lighting up with passion. Ben listened intently, his respect for her deepening with every word. "You've really turned things around," he said. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "And thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Their conversation was easy, filled with the comfort of two people who had weathered a storm together and come out stronger. As the night went on, they danced once, a quiet moment of joy that felt like a celebration of all they had overcome. In the end, Ben and Sarah's story wasn't about rekindled romance or a perfect resolution. It was about growth, healing, and finding their own paths. They had loved, lost, and learned, and that was enough. As they parted ways that night, both felt a sense of peace. Their lives were moving in different directions, but their shared history would always be a reminder of the strength it took to face life's challenges head-on. If you've been inspired by this story of redemption, resilience, and personal growth, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Share your thoughts below. What lessons did you take from Ben and Sarah's journey? And what would you have done in their place? Stay tuned for more incredible tales, and thank you for watching. See you next time.